Well, welcome everyone. Please, please grab a seat, and thank you all so much for coming. My name's Tom Crummell. I'm co-director of the Stanford Byers Center for Biodesign, and I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to join us today for the now 18th annual Thomas J. Fogarty Lecture, co-sponsored by the Department of Surgery at Stanford and Stanford Biodesign. And on behalf of Paul Yock and Mary Hahn, I offer my welcome to all of you. It's been an interesting year for Stanford Biodesign. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary, and that milestone gave us a chance to reflect on the mistakes and the successes of the past 15 years, goals and visions achieved, and plans for the next 15 years. It's so clear to us that the success of biodesign is very much a direct consequence of many of you in the audience, and so we are deeply, deeply grateful for your commitment to biodesign and for our mission to educate the next generation of health tech innovators, the future Tom Fogartys, if you will, though there are those that say Fogarty is one of a kind. This lectureship was established by the department and the program in biodesign to provide an annual opportunity to think about and have noted speakers from the health tech world, and we've evolved from bits and pieces to bits and bytes, especially as we think today about digital health. The Fogarty Lecture also celebrates the glorious ecosystem of Silicon Valley, the many, many disciplines that come out on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock to think, to interact, to talk, and to learn. And perhaps most importantly, when I approached Dr. Fogarty 18 years ago, I wanted the opportunity to have this lectureship to acknowledge Tom Fogarty's historic, creative, and ingenious contributions that he's made throughout his career. Tom's contributions are indeed legendary. In 2000, he received the Lemelson Award from MIT. This award, dubbed the Oscars for Innovation, is the world's biggest prize for inventors. In 2001, he was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. People like Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, those kind of folks. In 2014, just 2 years ago, Dr. Fogarty received the National Medal of Technology Innovation from none other than President Barack Obama at the White House. Dr. Fogarty's bio is in your booklet. Read it. It should be a source of inspiration, and Tom, it's great to have you here. Speaking... Good to still be here. You got that right. Speaking of a source of inspiration, this year's Fogarty Lecturer is Dr. Deb Kilpatrick, PhD, who currently serves as Chief Executive Officer of Evidation Health, a digital medtech company located in San Mateo. Deb has a distinguished and visionary career and positions of leadership in more than 20 years of medical technology and bioengineering experience. Evidation Health seeks to optimize health outcomes in the digital era using predictive analytics and machine learning. Doesn't matter whether you're a self-driving car or an iPhone and trying to understand how humans behave and how they respond. Those are really familiar aspirations in the digital world and well worthy of our consideration. Prior to her role at Evidation Health, Deb was Chief Commercial Officer of a genomic diagnostics company whose product was named to the Wall Street Journal's Technology Innovation Award, Time Magazine's Top 10 Medical Breakthroughs, and the Edison Awards. In 2011, Dr. Kilpatrick co-founded MedTech Women and the MedTech Vision Conference, now held annually in Silicon Valley. MedTech Women has created a network of hundreds of female MedTech leaders in the U.S. and indeed around the world. Prior to MedTech Women, Deb held multiple leadership roles at Guidant, Exponent, and the Georgia Institute of Technology, her alma mater. She serves on the advisory board at Georgia Tech, chairs the Georgia Tech College of Engineering Advisory Board, and is a fellow of the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. She's been named to Fierce Biotech's Top Women in Biotech, Top Women in MedTech, and Silicon Valley Business Journal's 100 Women of Influence. Deb is a distinguished speaker and lecturer. She's had a rollicking good time with both our current students, our alums, and an assortment of folks in the biodesign world over the course of the day. She's written numerous scientific articles, multiple patents, so who better to deliver this year's Fogarty Lecture entitled MedTech's Killer App, The Connected Patient, than Dr. Deborah Kilpatrick. Great to have you.
Thanks, Tom. When I got the letter, and there was an actual letter, actual snail mail letter, inviting me to do this, it was one of those moments where I looked and had this nanosecond of question of, was this addressed to the right person? And in fact, when Tom called me and asked if he could come talk to me at the office about doing this, I was like, great, that would be awesome. But I think my stance was a bit, I'm not sure I'm the right person yet for this. Meaning, this is something I always read about people doing at a point in their career that I didn't think I was quite yet at that point in my career. And out of respect, by the way. And he quickly convinced me otherwise for a number of reasons that he's mentioned, which is, the relevance of digital technology transforming what we're doing as a sector of healthcare and medtech, to the importance of leadership diversity in medtech and the voice that brings to the table. And most of all, because I really like Tom, and I really like Tom Fogarty, and I really like Paul Yock and Todd Britton and all the people that I've had the pleasure of working with at Biodesign over the years. And so what I'm going to talk about today is something that I think is highly relevant to every single person in this room. And I recognize that every single person in this room might not be on the industry side, they might not be on the academic side, they might not be on the clinical practice side, but we are all on the patient side, right? Whether you are not today, you will be someday. And so this is a topic that we should all care very much about. And as all great lectures aspire to be, they start by naming the lecture long before you know what the content's going to be. And so Tom and I talked back in October. I remember I was in New York at the Financial Times Digital Health Summit, and we were emailing back and forth, and it was like, so we decided this was the good title, right? And so then I had the auspicious and somewhat laudy process of creating content to fit that title. And I always start with a definition, right? I'm an engineer, I'm a process-oriented person. And I looked at, what actually is a killer app, and how does Wikipedia define it? And so this is what turns out. And then I really liked the structure of this definition, because there's two fundamental components to it. There's the technology or product part, and then there's the part that makes it indispensable to your life. And those are two related but really separate things. And I want to address them both in the context of this topic. But before I do, I also challenged myself, do I have a favorite all-time killer app? What is my favorite thing? Is it on my phone? Is it in my car? Is it on my bike? And I decided that my all-time favorite killer app was the Sony Walkman. And I went and looked to see if I could find an ad about the original Sony Walkman 2 launch, which was the best Sony Walkman, and we can engage in a debate about that for anybody that might want to, about why. And this was the ad. I actually, of course, found the print ad. And I just love it. Look at this guy on the bike. Look at him. He's got these big white athletic socks on, like the shorty shorts, right? And the business guy, and everybody's looking at the business guy and the woman, it's just a great ad. And I was like, wow. And then I started remembering my Sony Walkman. And then I was like, yes, that was my favorite killer app. And mine looked exactly like this. And by the time I had gotten through it, through high school with it, and I took it to college, and I remember vividly taking it to the library with me to study back before there was internet and we had to actually go find books. I remember the cover came off of it one day, and so what did I do? I grabbed a piece of athletic tape and I taped it right back on, and I used it for at least another 2 or 3 years, and it was exactly like this. And I loved it because it was metal on the side. What is metal anymore, right? And then I asked myself, why did I love this thing so much? And I realized there were sort of 3 reasons. It was designed to fit into my life. I had grown up listening to 8-track and radio tied to my room, right? I was stuck in my room, and I had to listen to whatever the radio played, and maybe my parents would let me, like, remember the buttons, like big, like, chiclet buttons on the car stereo that if you were lucky, you got to push and nobody would push it and make it pop back out? That was how my music experience had evolved to that point. And so it was suddenly designed to fit into my life, and I could listen to my music anytime, anywhere. Everybody else, Generation X? Yeah? Generation X? Yeah. Mixtapes. I could make my music, and I could take it with me, and I could listen to it anywhere. Yes, for those of you who might not know what a mixtape is, it's like a playlist. And there was a really great thing that happened in the ecosystem. By 1983, cassette tapes were outselling vinyl. And so that meant that my favorite thing was a platform for any music that I wanted, right? And so I was like, maybe there's something here. Like maybe this is representative of some broader criteria that is like what killer apps are. And so I'm going to come back to that, as you might suspect. So let's go back to the definition. And let's start with just the product part. And when Tom and I were talking about this lecture, I said, well, it's not really about my career. He goes, oh, no, there needs to be something about your career in it. I was like, okay, all right, I'll fit that in. And so I thought that it might be, I could use the fact that I've really been fortunate in my career in aerospace and healthcare and now digital to see some pretty cool stuff really up close. It doesn't mean I got to work on all of it, but I was in the companies doing this stuff. And in some cases, I really was working on it, and that was cool. But I wanted to sort of pull those out and see if there were some themes in those sort of killer products or killer apps that I could see. And those of you that know my background know that I started out as an engineer in doing DoD contracting at the tail end of the Cold War, the first one. I had to throw that in. And at the time, there were a lot of people in my background that were being recruited out of engineering programs in the United States to go work in the aerospace industry because computational technology was being developed, and it was being developed to push the limits of what a material could withstand in the air, right? And so what better place to do this but in the massive weapons program that was the F-22 Raptor. Now, the F-22 Raptor was designed or was intended to win in a dogfight in the air against a MiG. That's what it was designed to do. What it ended up doing, because we never knew if that could happen, we never actually saw that play out, thank goodness, but what it ended up being, to this day, to what we know and is public and not classified, is that it is the highest flying, fastest flying plane in the world. Still, to this day. It is designed to be an interceptor, which doesn't mean it's an all-purpose fighter. It means it's designed to hunt things down and shoot them out of the sky. So it has to be the fastest high-flying thing on the planet. And the way that it was really, I think, a function of 2 things: single crystal alloys and the Cray supercomputer. Now, I was lucky to be recruited into a group where the fusion of these 2 things was basically what I worked on. How can we model single crystal alloy behavior at extreme flight conditions using every bit of computational power on the planet on our desk? And so there were 5 Cray YMPs at the time I was doing this, and I was lucky enough to be running models on one of them, and basically all of those models would run on my phone now, I'm sure. But at the time, this was fixed field Nastran, which was a special type of Fortran that was developed for NASA and aerospace applications that the DoD was using for these computational applications. I am 100% convinced if we had not found a way to combine these 2 things, that we would have never known or learned, without much more great expense and time, how to actually design turbine blades that could withstand that kind of extreme flight conditions and create that plane, or the engine for that plane, right? That was cool thing number 1. Cool thing number 2 was stenting technology. And so by the time that I got to Guidant Corporation, there was this thing that had been launched called the Multilink. It had just been launched. And by the way, everybody that worked on the Multilink, Xience, any derivative thereof, or the Absorb product, raise your hand. A lot of people in this room worked on that stuff. And I had the really awesome opportunity to be sitting there inside R&D while this was going on. And the reason that it was a fun sandbox for me is because when Dan Cox, who's here, I haven't seen in a long time, and I were in New Ventures, this became the technology toolbox that we were using for all kinds of stuff. You know, regional drug delivery, using the stent as a scaffold to deliver drugs but not hold open the vessel. Like, we got to do really, really fun stuff. And what was amazing to me is that a lot of the things that we were doing in the aerospace industry, like in the decade prior, we began to need to do in order to push the envelope on design in terms of using different types of materials to design these scaffolds, right? Because some of them were being designed to hold open vessel, requires radial strength. Some of them weren't. In fact, you didn't want a lot of radial strength because you didn't want it to damage the vessel. So again, we used computational technology to virtualize as much of the product design or development process as we could. Along the way, medical devices became connected. And I'm using that phrase specifically, not patients, medical devices. Patients had a role in the Latitude system because they pushed a button. I remember the day that I was a guidant inside our division, and a guy named Ed Manica, who had been at our arrhythmia division in St. Paul, who was then running business development for my division of guidant, he walked in and he told me about this deal that had been done, which I now in retrospect recognize probably was some deal between Bluetooth and the division of guidant that was launching the Latitude system. And he was describing to me how this was going to work. Right? There's going to be, it's going to be completely wired. It's going to be a signal that goes to this module, and it's going to sit in a patient's bedroom or in the kitchen or wherever they want it to, and they're going to push a button, and all this data is going to shoot through there and go to wherever the receiving system is, which is going to be the physician's office. And I remember having this conversation with him, and this would have been like 2003, maybe 2004, maybe. So it was quite a while ago, certainly well in advance of smartphones. Well in advance of anything that I had heard of regarding Bluetooth. This was the first day I heard of the phrase Bluetooth. And I remember thinking, wow, this is going to change everything. I don't know how this is going to change everything, but this is going to change everything. And it was the first connected patient management system, right? And so when I talk about digital health, and most of the time I'm speaking to pharma and biotech or health plans. Sometimes I'm speaking to med tech companies, but more of the time I'm speaking to pharma and biotech, and oftentimes they will talk about how aggressively they're adopting digital, and I remind them that med tech was actually the first sector to adopt digital. There it is. And eventually, a patient's own biology becomes the killer app, right? So Human Genome Project declared complete in the Clinton administration, and all of a sudden, there's an influx of information that we never had access to before about what was wrong with patients, how they were getting worse, and how they could be getting better if we just got the right key to unlock the code. And that, again, changed everything. And so when I was at CardioDX, I began to be really, really fascinated at this idea that massive influxes of information fundamentally changes everything. It takes time, it doesn't happen fast, and it feels a little chaotic at first, but it changes everything. And now, lo and behold, we have immunotherapy in our world, right? Who would have imagined that? And it's happened relatively fast. And if you think about it, the long pole in the tent around genomic medicine really is not the computational problem. The original long pole in that tent, once the data was all there, was getting the tissue sample from the patient. Whether it was a blood sample, whether it was a tumor sample, or whether it was a skin sample, or whatever it was. We're living in a world now where getting the sample from the patient is as fast as me pushing a button on my phone. And so when I talk about the connected patient now, I want you to think about how fast genomic medicine has come to pass when we had to go get data in a fairly not convenient process, and how fast digital medicine is going to come to pass because of the ease with which we can actually get the data. Remember I said there were going to be some common denominators that started with me asking, like, why did I love my Walkman? If I look across all those things I just talked about, there's some, forgive me for using the word megatrend, there's some megatrends most overused word right now, I recognize. Products were becoming more centered around individual users or patients. Now, even in the case of the F-22 Raptor, F-22 Raptor cockpit was the first plane that was, military plane, that was designed to be occupied by 99% of the US Air Force pilot. That's a lot of people that have to be accommodated by a fairly complex cockpit, right? It was also one of the first cockpits that was fully glass. And I know you're like, what do you mean by that? I mean, there's like no more like little dials and things, like it's like glass, like touch screen stuff. This is a long time ago this is all happening, right? They were centering that product around that pilot in a way that had never been done before. And by the time I got to this part of my career in healthcare, we were really at a point where things were really being virtualized in terms of product development, more and more and more. Not just for efficiency's sake, but because it allows you to really push the envelope in the design phase of what you can do about what is feasible. If we had not had the platform capability of bioinformatics that was generated on the heels of the Human Genome Project, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have immunotherapy, we wouldn't have molecular diagnostics, and we wouldn't have any of the genomic tools we have. Massive virtualization on the computational side of that entire sector of healthcare, right? Market ecosystems played major roles. I think fairly obvious, yes, we had a Cold War, we had a weapons buildup, F-22 Raptor. More subtly than that, go back to the example of the Latitude system. Bluetooth wasn't created for the Latitude system. Bluetooth was created for something else entirely in telecom, right? If that market hadn't been there, and that technology and that market seeding of technology hadn't been there, the first connected patient management system might not have been till now. But that was a decade ago, right? So market ecosystems play major roles. Does this look familiar? Yeah. Patient-centric, user-centric. My music, anytime, anywhere. Virtualization outside my home. Market ecosystem, okay? So let's go to the second part of the killer app, which is how does it become virtually indispensable? Because this is the part we think about when we think of a killer app. Like, oh, it's like absolute part of my life. I love my phone. How many people use Caltrain Go? All right, yeah, Caltrain Go, for those of you, if you're a Caltrain user, you gotta use Caltrain Go. Like, it is the killer app of Caltrain information, okay? You'll know what I mean, just try it. But to become indispensable, a thing needs an ecosystem. It needs an ecosystem to thrive, right? My Sony Walkman would not have become so indispensable in my life in high school and college had I not been able to get any album I wanted on cassette. If I was still stuck listening to vinyl, I'd have been in my dorm room, right? Probably not studying as much. But then it actually enabled me to be an A student. You can think of it that way, right? Remember that. Your iPhones are enabling your children to be A students. I know. Okay, so on this topic of ecosystems and how it relates to industries, I think one of the best orators on this right now is Alec Ross. Now, Alec Ross was the technology advisor to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. And by the way, if you ever hear him talk, he'll make a point and say that the whole email server thing was not his idea. But aside from that, what Alec Ross does in his talks, when he talks about this book, is he examines sort of over history how eras of progress happen and what some common threads of that are and how they inform what we think is going to happen next, okay? And he starts by sort of thinking about what defines eras of progress. When we think about our eras of progress, whether it's the agricultural age or the industrial age, what is really defining those things? And his point is that really it's raw materials define it, right? In the agricultural age, it's land. In the industrial age, it's iron, which begets steel, right? And in the digital age, it's data. And he sort of goes one step further, and he says, ownership of the raw materials defines the ecosystem. And this is where it gets very interesting and why my entire thesis is about the connected patient, okay? So in the agricultural age, all concentrated among land ownership, right? In the industrial age, it's about companies. In the digital age, it's about people. Now, I don't know about you, but I always feel like I'm owning a lot of data. But the reality is we do. First of all, we own all of our medical data by law. Whether we can get to it or not is another issue. There's a fragmentation problem. But we own a lot of data. We are passing through a lot of data and content constantly, right? And so I believe when we start to think about this in the context of healthcare, that this will be the basis of the value-based ecosystem. And I'm going to unpack that because I know I'm making a big statement here, okay? When I say patients and their data, I'm specifically looking through the lens of what we do at Evidation at this point. And when we look at patient data, we think of it in 3 categories. We think of it as medical data, which is what you're thinking. It could be clinical trial data, it could be EHR data, it could be self-reported data, it could be adjudicated claims. Any kind of medical data, lab test data, right? Anything that informs about your own health status or our health status as patients. Behavioral data, which is what we really, really specialize in at Evidation, which is anything in the digital world that's reflecting what you are doing, right? Whether it's driving your car or talking on the phone or interacting with technology or using a mobile app or using a digital intervention or activating a social media feed or putting something out on Twitter, whatever. Anything that you can imagine that has an API or can be made into an API that's associated with behavior in the real world. Not just in the clinic setting, in the real world, right? Outside the clinic setting, in the life of all of us. And then contextual data, which is about the situations that we're in when that behavior is going on, right? Where am I? Wow, I'm really out of breath. Is it because I'm at 10,000 feet climbing Kilimanjaro? Is it because I've just climbed up Page Mill on my bicycle? Or is it because, I'm actually kind of sick and I actually am having a respiratory problem? Contextual data is really important. For a given activity or behavior, contextual data becomes the lens through which it is meaningful or not. And so when we do a lot of analytics in structured protocols, we're trying to quantify outcomes among connected patients. These are the 3 ways we look at the world. I'm going to come back to this because we're going to go back one layer further down on this data thing. But I want to address one question about, why now? Why right now is the connected patient the killer app of, I think, the entire medtech sector, but healthcare at large? And so I'm going to give you a couple of answers to this. One is fairly obvious, and I'm going to give you some numbers, but it's fairly obvious because we have massive amounts of content flowing through us that we are mediating, right? When you think about the amount of content, it is staggering. And so I asked a friend of mine at Google to give me some stats on this. Because to just say that it's a lot of content, yeah, we know that. But every minute of every day, this is what we're doing. This is an amazing amount of content. And why it's relevant to us, aside from the content itself and what that might say about our health, is that everybody that's doing this is a patient. If they're not a patient right now, they'll be a patient at some point, or they're a patient already at some point, right? And so all of these users are connected patients, right? But I think there's actually a more important reason to why now. And it's because these people, these patients, these consumers, us, we are behaving in new ways. And so I also asked my friend at Google, Ryan Olahan, I said, give me some data on this. Give me some signals of how people are behaving differently with regard to their interaction with technology and health. And so here are a few things that he pulled for me. I think this is very compelling. We are seeing behavior that simply never existed before 2013, right? And that doesn't seem that long ago to me. I mean, I know I'm getting older, time's flying, but that doesn't seem that long ago to me. And it's the interest in healthcare where and when I want it. Right? And I know we all know this, but look at the timeline here. Look at the shape of the curve, right? Where's a pharmacy? Where's a doctor? Where's a dentist? Where's a hospital? Where's a clinic, right? And so I'm going to show you a couple more versions of this kind of data because I want you to imagine there's this wave of change that's happening. And it's not just happening to us as consumers, it's happening to us as patients, right? And which is what's new. So then I asked him, I said, tell me, Ryan, what's the modality here? And exactly a year ago, in January 2016, something magical happened. Magical to those of us in technology. Maybe not as interesting to everybody else, but bear with me. And that was that the majority of health-related searches on Google surpassed, mobile surpassed web for the first time. And in fact, if you look across the whole year of 2016, or even the first half of 2016, the majority actually was on mobile. So we want on-demand healthcare, we want to have choices, and we want it to be mobile mediated, which means it's got to be part of my life. Back to my Walkman, right? That was mobile mediated music. That's all that was. And so then I pulled the most recent Rock Health report, which just came out in December, of basically the state of consumer adoption in digital health, right? And this is a survey they did. And they just looked between one year of time, 12 months of time, the difference between people who aren't adopting at all and the super adopters. And the way they're defining this is look at the categories of digital health. So telemedicine, wearables, right? Online searches, et cetera. So it's fairly broadly defined. But how fast is the super adopter category changing in 1 year? This is a wave of change in every way, in every aspect. And a lot of times when I'm talking to different customers, different partners, different folks in the ecosystem, I get asked, okay, Deb, I believe this, but really, isn't it just millennials? No, it's not just millennials. I'm not a millennial. I'm in the third category from the bottom. And what I like about this particular plot is it breaks down by age, sort of the variety of modalities, right? So phone, email, text, live video, app-based. Yeah, look at the millennials. They are using everything, like a lot, right? But first of all, they're aging into the system, right? I know they think they're impenetrable now and never gonna have a problem, but they're aging in the system. But look at everybody else below them. They're not using stuff. They're just using it less. That's not surprising. That's not surprising. Again, there's this wave of change coming. And to look at that wave, you have to look at these trends. So what's so special about right now is a bigger point than the patients and users being the same people. It's that people are integrating this into their lives. And that is a change. That is a change, a profound change since I've been a patient, right? It is a big, big change. And I believe that it has to really affect how we in the medtech sector think about our product designs, our product utility, and how we prove evidence. And if healthcare is not episodic, then the way we think about outcomes in the value-based future we're all living in now can't be either. And this is the part where I'm going to start to talk a little bit about what we do at Evidation. For people that in the room that may not be as versed in how health outcomes is measured, generally they're measured in clinical trials, they are measured at specific time points, and they are measured when you visit your doctor, okay? Those are episodic events. They happen at discrete points in time, and very often there are long times in between that we as patients are experiencing health stuff, right? That is unknown to the system. It is invisible. And yet our entire health ecosystem, our entire incentive structure, our entire delivery of healthcare is based on outcomes that are fairly episodic in the way that they're defined. And now, it doesn't have to be that way. We can have all those episodic data sets, which are critically important, and I'm not suggesting that they go away at all. I would argue they become more important because underneath them is all the invisible data that we're going to use to augment them. Right? And so now it's not just about a 6-minute walk test in my primary care visit if I'm a COPD patient. It's about the integral of my activity over the next month when they change my dosing of my inhaler. This is both important, but now we can show value and we can show outcomes in a completely different and new way. And I think this is really, really important for patient care and really, really important for innovation. And so at Evidation, we think of the data universe of the future sort of looking like this, or at least the data universe of right now looking like this. Who knows what it'll look like in the future? When we think about how we quantify health outcomes, remember I said medical, behavioral, contextual? This is sort of the universe of how we look at that and how it overlays. So over to the left, we've got clinical trial data. Absolutely. Critically important. Going to be as important, if not more important, in the future of healthcare. The last decade, a lot of what we've done, in industry certainly, is we've looked at claims data, medical claims, pharmaceutical claims. We've spent tons of money in industry buying claims data because we want to understand what's actually going on in real world practice. We just once something's been approved and it's out in real world practice by physicians, how is it getting used? What's happening, right? That was our lens to look through. And then we got smarter and smarter and realized that we really should be running real world registries, right? After something is in launch so that we can understand what's really going on. And in fact, now, in many cases, the FDA mandates it in the therapeutics world in the form of post-market surveillance. EHR data came along too. That's in there too. That's all part of real world practice. All of this is dwarfed in terms of the quantity of information possible by data that we can now see about the real life of the patient once that patient is connected into the digital world, which is basically everybody at this point, right? And certainly I already talked about behavior data, I've already talked about contextual data, but I didn't talk about patient-reported metrics, and I'm using that phrase specifically rather than patient-reported outcomes because I think patient-reported outcomes, unfortunately, have gotten a bit of a bad rap over the years, right? And I think they've gotten a bad rap because they were largely based on patient diaries. And I don't know about you, but I can't remember what happened to me last Friday. I mean, I can look at my calendar and know what meetings I had, but I don't remember if I woke up with my, my right hamstring, which is giving me a lot of problems right now. Was it hurting more than the last? I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that in critical cases where episodic care has been delivered and we want to see whether it worked or not, that patient-reported metrics, when we can get them anytime, anywhere, become really important part of the story, right? They too are seeing, I think it's like patient-reported outcomes 2.0. I think that's what we're like going into. And so what this means we can do is it means we can prove value and maximize value of healthcare products in really new ways. And this is the point, okay? I believe that in the value-based world of healthcare, which we are all in to varying degrees, right? These new kinds of looking at product, new ways of looking at product impact are paramount to innovation. And the reason why is because I think it opens up the door of product impact having a longer, sort of longitudinal, broader view. And if you can do that and measure it, your design space opens up, right? And if your design space opens up, your innovation space opens up. And your innovation space opens up, I can guarantee you patients are going to benefit, right? So when you change over to a value-based world where you can measure impact all the time, it just really opens up your universe of design possibilities on the technical side, certainly on the clinical side too, right? And this is what is most exciting. So the kinds of stuff that we do right now at Evidation, I sort of tried to divide up into kind of 4 kinds of use cases. Like one is just characterize, something sounds very simple, characterize quality of life improvement, but characterize it like every day. Right? I already gave one example in respiratory disease. There are many, many others. You can get what I'm going for here. Using digital biomarkers to identify clinically relevant events. We have a couple of DARPA grants right now. One of them is involved in digital biomarkers and cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. Using mobile data. This is not requiring something fancy. It's using existing data sources and data technologies, but looking at them in a whole new way because we can measure them and now adjudicate them and line them up with virtually acquired medical data over time. Segment population benefit and identify super responders. One of the things that was so exciting about, and well, is exciting about the genomic medicine era, which we are forever in, really at this point, is that we can identify, in many cases, super responders based on biology, right? And I think that we're entering into the digital era. We're entering into an era where we can identify super responders based on behavior, right? I don't know about you, but I don't actually respond the same way to CrossFit training as everybody else does, or respond the same way to a coaching mechanism that everybody else does, or respond the same way even to a radio DJ that everybody else does. It's because I'm different, right? Everybody is. And so digital therapeutics, digital medicine, and the existing world of medtech and biotech and pharma work the same way. It's not just about biology, it's also about behavior. And we know this because we've been talking about medication adherence and lifestyle modification adherence for decades. This is just another way of saying it. And so one of the things we do is identify behavioral phenotypes in populations with a given therapeutic condition and identify for companies where are you really getting population benefit and where are you not. In a value-based world, this is critically important because in the cases where companies or industry or ACO provider systems or HMOs are going to be required to basically be paid on the basis of outcomes, you want to know who's benefiting from your outcomes, because you want to either put resources there to exacerbate it and magnify it, or put resources where they're not responding and figure out how to get them to respond, right? So there's some fundamental economics that we've really been challenged by in healthcare that have prevented us from really going whole hog into a value-based world that I think are beginning to kind of come away with these hurdles going away. And then optimizing digital tools and services around the therapy. There's so many pharma and biotech conferences about digital services around the pill. It's really more broad than that. I mean, that's the current topic of today, but it's really broader than that. And remember how I said that the original connected patient management system were Latitude and the systems that were put in place by the pacing companies? Imagine if there had been a smartphone and a mobile app reminding them to push that button at a certain time, or by the way, not even having to push a button at all, right? Imagine from a product development standpoint how much you could accelerate tailoring products and product performance to actual clinical behavior day to day and clinical needs day to day. I mean, it's really transformative. And so it's early days. I get a lot of questions a lot of times about, like, oh, what insights are you seeing? And yeah, we see some stuff, believe me. Some stuff that rises above therapeutic areas, some stuff that's specific to therapeutic areas. But make no mistake, we are at the dawn of this, right? This is, what I'm telling you is the direction that I believe we're all going. And it's so good for innovation and ultimately so good for patients. And the reason that it's so important for medtech specifically with regard to industry is that there's been this asymmetry forever post-launch, which everybody who's been on the industry side understands, which is if you have something go wrong, right, not by your own fault even, but because a mistake was made and you have a recall, there's a lot of bad things that happen from that, and sometimes a lot of bad things that can happen to patients from that. That's just, and that should be. But what happens when your product is performing extremely well and knocking it out of the park and nobody sees it? There is no upside. And capital markets don't work well without a little more symmetry there. So I believe this is the kind of approach that really allows product performance to be measured and be an incentive basis on the basis of connected patient data for the future of medtech and how it will innovate. And that's what excites me so much about it. That's why I'm at Evidation. So if real-life patient data can redefine health outcomes, and outcomes underlie the future of value-based care, that's why I'm saying that connected patients are the ultimate killer app. I do think the common denominator here, if I go back to that slide, healthcare has become patient-centric. We've been in several years now of sort of patient-centric mentality in healthcare. I actually think we're moving into an era of patient-mediated healthcare, which is slightly different. Patient-centric is it's being revolving around me. Patient-mediated means I have a say in it, right? I think it's fundamentally different, and I think that's the next place that this is all going. Technology, remember how my second point was like virtualization of product development or performance? Well, there's absolutely no question here. Technology is virtualizing our ability to deliver care, telemedicine being a very simple, easy, straightforward example of that. But to the point of what we do at Evidation and why I'm so excited about what I'm talking about, it actually is virtualizing our ability to measure outcomes all the time, anytime, anywhere. Market ecosystems are becoming value-based. This is the most important part of this in many ways, right? If we had been magically able to do this 10 years ago, would it have mattered as much? I don't know, maybe. But I think that without a value-based mindset around incentive structures in the US healthcare system, I don't think we would have had a push from the market to accelerate this. I think that we have a push from the market to accelerate this. And probably the most often question that I get when I talk about this stuff is, okay, this is great, Deb. I buy your argument. I buy your argument that this is like a real thing and that outcomes are being measured virtually and that's going to be based for value-based care. It's been great for patients. But are patients really ready for this? And the answer is yes. And so as you can imagine, when I'm talking to investors or I'm talking to companies in different parts of the country that know I'm from Silicon Valley, if I don't show them this, they think that I'm doing everything in a bunch of quantified selfers in San Francisco in the Mission District. Okay. And so Leslie Oley, who's sitting here, who works at Evidation, I sent her, and is a Biodesign fellow alum, I should say. I asked her, I said, Leslie, you got to give me a map. Like, I need a map. I need a map of, like, the last 2 prospective studies that we did and where these people were from. And I didn't know when I asked her, by the way, what it was going to look like. But I was very pleased to see that it looked like this. And it's because we've virtualized the process of reaching out and touching patients where they are in their lives, under informed consent, getting them to opt into the broad participation of essentially clinical research, right, for the first time, really broad participation, involving them in healthcare broadly and individually. And that is why I think ultimately they're the killer app, okay? So I have 3 closing statements for, like, if I were in your shoes, if I was a founder right now, if I was a CEO of a company, if I was an operator or a manager in a company and thinking about med tech, what do I do? And think about getting real-life patient data, even if you don't yet know how to use it. And by the way, we couldn't have said this a decade ago because we didn't have the storage capability for that. We really don't have a storage limitation anymore, right? Amazon Web Services have solved that for us. We do not have a storage problem. Get the data, right? Ask patients to self-report outcomes in anytime, anywhere ways. It's not on our terms, it's on their terms. If we know that a person is routine-driven and they eat breakfast every day at 8 after they come home from the gym and that they like to use their phone at 8 while they're eating breakfast, you know what? That's probably when they're going to give you an honest outcome answer about how their knee feels. Like, I'm talking about really simple stuff that was impossible to do before, right? Let connected patients be your killer app to prove your product value, because ultimately I come from a perspective of a capitalist view of this economy that we're in, that we deserve as an industry to be paid on value. We owe it to the patients to deliver it, right? And so these are my 3 pieces of advice. Easier said than done, I know. And so I told Tom that I had a bully pulpit, so I got to thank a bunch of people, so I'm going to do that. To Ray Vito and Cy Glagoff, who are the sole reason that I ever entered into healthcare. And I had to solve 3 equations. And so those of you who are fellow engineers will appreciate this, that I'm actually got an integral in here. I was part of an NIH SCORE grant for atherosclerosis in the 90s that was held between University of Chicago Medical School and Cy Glagoff was alive in there, and Ray Vito at Georgia Tech. And I was at the right place at the right time because they needed somebody who understood finite element theory, and guess what I did? Because that's what I'd done in the aerospace industry. And so I was really, really fortunate with these 2 gentlemen, these brilliant minds, to allow me to work on a really, really hard mathematical problem, but a really fantastic, turned into a really fantastic clinical entry point for me. Special thanks number 2. As I was putting this together, I realized, there were a lot of collaborators that formed my view of translational research during the years that I was at Guidant and responsible for a lot of that. And I went and put a list together. And along the way, I'd forgotten that 2 of our pieces of work ended up on, like, major journals. One was on the cover of Circulation, one was on the cover of JACC, which is the Journal of American College of Cardiology. When I'd forgotten it, when I realized it, I was like, wow, that's cool. And I don't know if Jeff Ellis is here today. I wanted his name on this list because Jeff worked with me on translational research collaborations with academic institutions for many years at Guidant. He's still at Abbott, and he was responsible for both of these projects and relationships, and I hope he's as proud of that as I am. Most importantly, on the industry side, and I've got a lot of colleagues and investors and friends in this room right now who have decided to leave work early on a Friday and battle the traffic, which is insane, I know. On the eve of JP Morgan, right? I mean, I know we all just really want to rest. And it's like the eve of NFL wildcard weekend, and it's like almost the college football play. I know. So I appreciate you all being here. And I couldn't point to a single entity here that I love any more than other. I love all of them the same, of course. But for those of you that are represented on this, I want you all to know how much this has all meant to me. and will continue to mean to me, because it's not over. This is not like an end of career talk. But this is formative. This is formative. Every single thing I've said today was formed by these experiences and the people that I've interacted with. And a very special thanks to my family. Casey and Kale are sitting right here, and without their constant patience in my being home late and missing the train and getting the later one, and needing to go to just one more investor meeting, but I've known this is really it. This is like a really great idea. We got to do this. They're very patient and loving, and this is sitting at Fallen Leaf Lake, which I'm sure all of you know, and I promise them there will be more nights like that one. So thank you.
Folks, that's what you call a brain stretch. And don't you feel lucky that you braved the traffic, took the time to be a part of yet another spectacular Fogarty Lecture. I was thinking back at the tradition of brain stretches in the Fogarty Lecture. The first one from Tom when he told the story of the balloon catheter when he was derisively told that this was the dumbest idea that anyone had ever had, and that only one so uninformed as a medical student would dare to think of it. And then I think back at Andy Grove's, former CEO of Intel, comments about shift left, how you people that think that healthcare only happens in the hospital are wrong. It's moving to the consumer. And then I think about John Hennessy about 4 years ago, who said the most important trends in computational science, John's a computer scientist, are mobile and social. And each one of those trends is reflected in exactly what you hear today. Finally, two of my children and my son-in-law, when every time I kind of go, Facebook, what the hell is that? They remind me, Dad, we will soon have 2 billion customers a month. Get your head around that. 25 to 28% of the world uses Facebook on a monthly basis. So more to come on this, Deb. That was absolutely spectacular talk again. We're most grateful. Couldn't have been better. And we have the Fogarty Eaglet, which says the 18th Annual Thomas J. Fogarty Lecture, Focus on Innovation. And the whole idea is the rise of new ideas being taken to flight. And again, we're so grateful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Good. Okay, well, good stuff. Thank you all for, again, devoting your time and energy. It means a lot to have all of you here. If you have thoughts or questions or comments, feel free to grab Deb, or she's in the phone book. As you can tell, she cares a lot about
I'm
what
online.
you... Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. Thank you all.